All right, it is NFL draft week here on the College 12 pack. Tyler, there's a lot to get to with the NFL draft coming up Thursday night, 3 nights. For me, this is like Christmas. I always look forward to the NFL draft each and every year, getting to unwrap where these guys are going. We've talked about it for months on end. Maybe not on the show, but we've talked about it for months on end. And we're ready to find out where some of these guys are going. But before we get into all that, there was this little thing called spring football going on over the past couple of weeks. I know we were out last week because Tyler was down here in Texas celebrating with me as I got married. But now that that's kind of behind us, we're going to focus on our top storyline from spring ball this past week. And Tyler, I'll kick it off. I'll stay right here in Texas. How about Arch Manning throwing a couple of bombs in the orange white spring game in Austin? He looks good. I mean, I know there were some questions maybe last year, like he wasn't quite ready. He looks ready, or at least he looks like what many expected him to be coming out of high school. Obviously, with a name like Manning, we expect that you can throw the football, and he had a couple bombs, a couple of passes, catch and run, but looked really good. What do you say to the Texas faithful who maybe are a little upset that Quinn Ewers is coming back because they have to wait another year for the Arch Manning show to begin?
Yeah, I mean, he was impressive. Hard to argue with that. I think that, I mean, so they didn't record official stats for this game, but ESPN kind of compiled it based on what they were able to put together. And they said he was 19 of 26 for 355 yards and 3 touchdowns. Yeah, he looks like he's developing really nicely. And a couple of those drops were dropped, or a couple of those incompletions were dropped touchdown passes. So could have been even potentially a better stat line from Arch in that game. It's spring football. We don't want to overreact to spring games one way or another, as we'll get into in a minute. These games are designed to allow players to show off to an extent. So I think you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But with that being said, I mean, he looked very sharp. The throws he was making were nice. He looked like he was, in time, throwing accurately. It's got to be promising if you're a Texas fan. The quarterback position beyond Quinn Ewers, assuming he's gone after this year, it looks pretty solid. And frankly, if Quinn Ewers were to struggle at all in any big games this season, I think, we could be having some very interesting conversations because Arch looks like he's ready to go to me.
Yeah, I mean, you hope he doesn't struggle because there's a big game early on their schedule that a lot of people might be circling. Is a game up in Ann Arbor against the defending national champions. Could tell us a lot about both teams, really. Is Michigan on the same level as they were a year ago? Are they not? Is Texas ready to compete with the big boys? They made it to the college football playoff for the first time last year. Obviously, they lost to Washington, who went on to play Michigan, but they look good. Yeah, they're losing Jatavion Sanders. They're losing a lot of talent, and we'll get into some of those talented players they're losing here shortly. But there's another storyline I think we want to talk about, another quarterback who we might have spent a little bit of time on, and you really wanted to circle Drew Aller of Penn State, who did not look as good as one Arch Manning after one spring game.
No. Again, he was only 15 of 32 for 202 yards in that game. And frankly, if you just watch some of the plays, it just didn't look good. He was off. I think, his timing, his accuracy. I mean, granted, in his defense, it was a pretty windy day, so not like ideal spring game conditions at Penn State. But it's still a concern. We talked about it on the last episode. They're bringing in a new offensive coordinator in Andy Kudlnicki. I think that we both expect that they're going to open things up a little bit more on offense this year. And I think, we said that the big question is, can Drew Aller handle that? Can he handle, taking a bigger role, being asked to do more in the passing game? Not the most encouraging sign so far. Obviously a lot of time between now and the season, and it is a spring game. And while I generally think that, I think you can react a little bit to bad spring games. I think good spring games are a little bit less telling. If you're struggling in a spring game, I think that is a reason to be concerned. And, again, it's just going to be such a big year for James Franklin and Penn State because they took a lot of steps. They were very proactive this offseason to try to make things better. But, if your 5-star quarterback just isn't developing the way that he needs to be, then that's going to be a big limiting factor.
Yeah, I can agree to that. I think it's more telling if you have a bad one rather than a good one. But the things you want to see is the timing. Is it there? Is there continuity there, especially with a new play caller? There's a chemistry. We talk a lot about chemistry between a quarterback and a wide receiver or a tight end, but what's the chemistry between your play caller and your quarterback? And I think that takes time. It's not just, I'm going to come in and give you my playbook and you're going to learn it and we're going to go from there and you're going to go out there and you're going to look fine. You're going to look exactly like you did a year ago. That's not the way things work. So I think there is some concern, but there's also enough time to get this right. And given the way that they've played and, last year and the year before, more in recent memory under Franklin, I'm not concerned yet. But if they come into the season and he looks this way, then I will definitely be like, I don't think it was the wind, that really messed things up. But we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, there's some concerns there. But talking about quarterbacks, Tyler, let's talk NFL draft. I don't know if you know this, but there's a lot of quarterbacks that are probably going to be drafted this year. And it's funny. It seemed like every year we have the conversation. Oh, you better get a quarterback this year because have you seen next year's class? It's horrible, right? We play this game every year, and then lo and behold, we got 4 quarterbacks who could go anywhere from 1 through 5. I mean, okay, let's say 3 quarterbacks anywhere from 2 through 5 because I think we all know who's going number 1, and we'll get into that in a minute. But when we look at these quarterbacks, I want to know how many you think are going in round 1, and I want you to name them. And we'll get into maybe some of the spots where they might land. But for you right now, how many are going?
Yeah, I mean, so like you said, we always kind of do the, this is the class. You got to. Next year's not as good. I think this class was actually a little overhyped. Like this time last year, I think the depth of this class was a bit overhyped. But with that being said, it's a very strong class at the top. I mean, like you said, I think 4 guys that are pretty much guaranteed to go in the top 10 and could potentially, depending on trade movement and stuff, go in the top 5, like you said. So, I mean, obviously the Caleb Williams, who I think we both probably agree we'll get into in a second, but is a lock to go first overall. We, and I think everyone else in the country agree that. And then, it looks like the other ones are Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and JJ McCarthy, all of which have gotten buzz at, 2nd overall, 3rd overall, certainly top 10 hype. And I think, beyond that, to be honest, I could see someone else going. I could see a team, psyoping themselves into taking Bo Nix or Michael Penix. Truthfully, though, and again, we'll get into this, but I don't think either of those guys are first round prospects. I would not take either of them in the first round. I think Bo Nix did successfully at Oregon, but I think he was very limited in what they were asking him to do. I think they both have the same issue of being, older quarterbacks. They're more finished products than a guy like Caleb Williams is going to be. And I think that finished product, leaves a lot to be desired. Again, in Nick's case, didn't have to do a lot. And in Penix's case, I think has some accuracy problems that were sort of, he was bailed out by the talent he had at receiver last season. I think both of those guys are to me a significant step behind those other 4 that we talked about. So I could see maybe one of those 2 sneaking in, but I'm going to say it's 4. I'm going to say the 4 go in the top 10, and I think that's it.
I'm taking the field here. I'm going 5 or 6. And let me just break it down for you. We're not going to talk about the top 4 because we're really going to hammer that home shortly. But let's just talk about Bo Nix. I think a team like Denver would still be interested in Bo Nix, and I know they just made a trade. Nothing about the Zach Wilson trade leads me to believe the quarterback is not on their list. Because you do need camp arms. You need arms behind them, especially to get through the offseason work and all that. But I still think that their quarterback situation needs to be addressed, and I think that could be a Bo Nix spot. This is one that I think is interesting, and I'm not a take Michael Penix in the first round or bust kind of guy. But what I will say is if you're a team picking in the middle of the first round, why not move back and pick up Penix later? It gives you a lower slot you have to pay him at, but you still get that 5 years of control. Kind of, cheaply see if he is the guy that could do it. Like a team like Las Vegas, could they potentially move back instead of moving up? And that's where I kind of think that we could potentially see six. I don't think that's probable at all. It's definitely possible if a team were to move back, but as if there's no movement as it sits right now, I'm going to go with 5 at max.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a fair possibility. I mean, I would also say that I think, just to be clear, even though I don't think either of them are first round prospects, I think I'd be a little surprised if either of them were still around by like 40. I think that some of those quarterback needy teams that don't really have a shot at the Jaden Daniels, Drake Mays, JJ McCarthy's without a move to trade up, I could easily see those guys either doing what you said, trading back and taking a Penix or a Nix in the 20s, or I could just see them holding firm, with their early second round picks and just making the move there. I think either of those are possibilities.
Another team that I would throw in there is potentially the Cowboys as a team that might be looking to draft a quarterback. They're in the 24. Maybe they move back a little bit. And the reason why I say that is they have 3 quarterbacks and none of them are under contract after the season. So they're another team you might want to pay attention to. But I'll go 5. Tyler's going 4. But obviously the one quarterback that's going to go number 1 overall, I think we all can agree, is Caleb Williams. There was smoke even before they traded Justin Fields. So looking at what Chicago's going to do, it's obviously Caleb. The bigger question is who do they package that deal with number 9 overall? Do they get a wide receiver? Romo Dunze was tweeting about Caleb on their flight to Detroit for the NFL draft. That's a potential package they could get, but I think everybody in America is saying Caleb. I don't know that I feel like it's probably the worst kept secret. Like they could go ahead and announce a contract and just say we've already got a deal lined up for Caleb because it's a foregone conclusion at this point. It's when you get to pick number 2 that really I think you start having those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it's a no-brainer with Caleb. This move has been obvious since they traded Justin Fields. It was pretty clear even before that. And I think, I mean, I will say I have my questions about Caleb Williams. I don't necessarily think he's the most polished prospect we've seen, but I do think that he's, clearly a step ahead of everyone else in this class. I think when you look at, the stuff he can do off platform, his arm and stuff, I think he's just capable of doing things that no one else in this class is, and really not many quarterback prospects that we've seen come through in recent years are. So I think it's easy to see why, even with the questions I have, which are, I think he struggled at times in college when facing, great defensive lines. Look at that Notre Dame game. They put pressure on him and he made mistakes. I think it's fair to expect there's going to be a learning curve at the next level for him. And maybe, this isn't going to be great in year 1, but with the upside, you have to take him. And they have a really special opportunity, like you said, with that 9th pick in such a good receiver class. You could really build a nice offensive young core when you already have a good receiver in DJ Moore. There's a lot of potential here.
Yeah, you can always add to it. Yeah, I think, and it's not that like he blew us away. I mean, he did win the Heisman year before last, and he's shown something. But I think even when coming out of high school, I think he was one of the top 3 quarterbacks, if not the number 1 quarterback of his class. I can't remember because I think his class also had Quinn Ewers in there, and I think he was the consensus number 1. But still, coming out of high school, I think a lot of people felt like this guy is going to be coached by Lincoln Riley and be a number 1 overall pick. That is something that Riley had done in the previously with 2 other quarterbacks. So it's not a surprise to see him go there. And I can agree. I think there's some things that lead you to have some concern. But as far as that number 1 pick, I feel like Caleb is the safest pick. When it comes to what they need to do, they obviously need a quarterback. They don't have a quarterback, so you take him, and that's the right move. Now, when we go beyond that, we talk about Washington coming in at number 2, Tyler, and this is where a guy that you watched for the last 2 years has been slotted for most mock drafts, you very rarely do I see anybody but him there. So, I mean, some people have said Drake May, but I think Jaden Daniels to Washington also, I'm not going to say it's a done deal 100%, but I would probably lean 80-20 that Jaden Daniels is the number 2 pick when Washington comes up to the podium, unless somebody comes in with a wild RG3 type deal.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I'm probably even higher than 80-20 on it. And I'm basically 100 at the prospect of Jaden Daniels being the number 2 pick. I think, could a trade happen there? Possibly. But I mean, Washington needs a quarterback. And I think when you look at the Cliff Kingsbury offense, I think you could see Jaden Daniels, fitting it pretty well. The only hangup, honestly, is that it seems like, I don't want to like give too much into pre-draft speculation, but it seems like there may be some issues that Jaden Daniels camp has with the Commanders. I don't know, but there's been some rumors that he doesn't want to play for them, and I've seen NFL insiders not exactly shoot it down. He shot it down today for what it's worth. They asked him, if he'd be happy to play for anyone, or they asked him about it, and he said he'd be happy to play for anyone who drafted him, including the Commanders. So I think we can probably put that to bed, and in all likelihood, he will be the pick there. Truthfully, I don't agree with it. I think that Drake May is clearly the second best quarterback in this class, and I might get some flack from LSU fans for that. But like, I think Drake May is a more complete prospect with fewer questions. I look at Jaden Daniels. I think there's a lot of traits that you can like about him. I mean, the athleticism, the arm strength, there's a lot of it that's there. And you can see what the vision looks like for Jaden Daniels being a good NFL prospect. But I think there's red flags with him too, to be honest with you. I think his size, he's on the thinner side, and he took some rough hits in college. He didn't have the best field awareness, and he kind of would get hit and, lose the ball and ragdoll a little bit. I think that's kind of a concern in the NFL. He's got to play a little bit smarter than that. I also think, he was a late bloomer. He's 23. He's like 23 years old, and we didn't really see him come along, really until his 6th season of college football. That's, I think, a concern, at least should be a concern to NFL teams. And he also had a lot of talent around him. I mean, 2 guys this year that are going to be taken not too long after him in the first round at receiver. So I think there's a lot of reasons that I have potential hangups with Jaden Daniels that I just don't have with Drake May. And I think he's going to be good. Don't get me wrong. I would not take him if Drake May was still there.
I think you brought up a good point, and one thing I will kind of piggyback on is Jaden Daniels better learn how to slide in the NFL, because the things that he got away with at LSU probably aren't going to fly in the NFL, just because everybody's bigger, stronger, faster. I mean, you think about it, there's pretty much an All-American at every position in the NFL. So you've got to play a little bit differently. But I can agree. But here's the counterpoint I'll make with you saying Drake May over Jaden Daniels, and I'm not going to say that one way is right way of thinking. When these teams draft, they're looking for traits, and maybe what he wants to do offensively fits a little bit better. But also, I would probably lean to agree with you that I think Drake May might be a better Cliff Kingsbury quarterback. While he did do some things with Kyler Murray, I've watched Cliff Kingsbury offenses over the years, and kind of that guy who can stand in the pocket and deliver it is it's all about timing. It's a timing based offense, nothing more than that. So I can agree with you on that, but I also think that Jaden Daniels is going number 2, and likely Drake May at number 3, but also there's JJ McCarthy who can get in there with the Patriots at number 3, and then we kind of go from there. But let's talk about a position that has not been really talked about in the NFL draft, especially in the first round, because there is no Bijan Robinson in this draft. There is no Ezekiel Elliott from 2016, or there's no top tier running back. So where does the first running back go? And I think it's day 2, probably in the 3rd round. Jonathan Brooks, who actually turned out to be the backup for Bijan, kind of took over. Now, he has concerns with knee injury with that ACL tear, so I also find it kind of funny that he's kind of been tabbed as that top tier running back when he has – I'm not sure when he's going to be able to play based on the ACL, but I also know with current medicine and treatments, that he likely will be ready to go relatively early. But how interesting is it to you that kind of Jonathan Brooks is viewed as that top guy rather than a guy like Will Shipley or Trey Benson or Blake Corum?
Honestly, not too surprising because I mean, like, so yeah, this is a weak class. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This is one of the weaker running back classes we've seen in a while. And there isn't that, top end guy that you could maybe justify taking in the first round because I mean, these days, the position of the running back position has been so devalued in the NFL. We don't see it getting drafted high. We don't see those guys getting big time extensions unless they're guys like Christian McCaffrey that are very impactful in the passing game as well. And I think that's why that you're going to see Jonathan Brooks be the first off the board because he has the potential to do that. I mean, the concern is coming off an ACL tear. I think the concern is less about the timetable of him coming back. It's like we've seen guys can come back from these really fast now. And even if he has to miss a few games, that's not the end of the world in the grand scheme of things. I think the bigger concern is can he come back with the same speed and athleticism that he showed at Texas because he was really good. Maybe not quite Bijan Robinson, but he was very productive. And I think a guy that would be desirable for NFL teams. I mean, truthfully, a guy that we're probably talking about as a early second round, if not late first round pick, if he doesn't have the knee injury concerns. So, I think I like his NFL traits more than I would a guy like, Blake Corum or Trey Benson or Jalen Wright from Tennessee. Like, I think those guys, I don't quite see the upside that I do with Jonathan Brooks. So I think whoever lands him on day two probably is going to be getting a really potentially great player.
I think it's interesting. I was checking out Daniel Jeremiah's top 150 that he put out. I want to say yesterday, day before, and the only running back he has ranked higher than Jonathan Brooks, who's at number 57, by the way, is Marshawn Lloyd of USC at 56. So you're right. It's not a deep class. Well, let me just say this. I think it's deep in terms of there's some guys who can make an impact. It's not top heavy.
No.
There's no guy that really would justify a top 50 pick. But like you said, if Brooks was healthy, maybe. All right, so we've talked about quarterbacks, running backs. Let's get to the wide receivers. Now, this is really where it's top heavy. I mean, the wide receivers at the top of this draft. If you want a game breaker, at the very top of this draft is where you're going to get them. And really, when you look at these drafts and look at who could go where, wide receiver is another position that I think we're going to see 3 and 4 guys in the top 10. I mean, obviously, we talked about Marvin Harrison, your guy Malik Neighbors. We also have Rome Odunze, and I wouldn't be shocked if somebody decided to grab Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, I kind of feel like those guys right now are the top 4 in terms of pass catchers, and beyond that, are there any more that we should be looking at as far as first round guys? I mean, there's a pair down in Texas, and we'll get into them in a minute. But outside of those 4, like how many do you see going in round 1?
Truthfully, maybe one more. I might even say just those 4 because I think so. This is a really good receiver class. Like I want to get that straight right off the bat. There are a lot of good mid-round prospects in this draft. When you start looking at guys like Xavier Legette, Ricky Pearsall, there's some really good talent that are probably going to go on day 2. But I really think there's only 3 elite prospects. I think when you look at Marvin Harrison Jr., when you look at Malik Neighbors, and you look at Rome Odunze, I think those are the 3 guys that I'm not going to say they have no weaknesses, no questions, but I think they are clearly the most well-rounded. And I think then there's a little bit of a gap to Brian Thomas Jr., who I think is a lock to go in the first round at this point. I mean, some mocks show him going as high as the top 15. I'd be very surprised if he fell past the early to mid 20s. I think that's probably the low range of him getting picked on Thursday night. I think that beyond that, though, I think you start to kind of get to guys that I don't know if it's worth taking in the first round. Like you mentioned, the Texas guys, Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell, we'll get to him, but I think maybe I could see one of those 2. I mean, Kuiper's latest mock had 7 receivers going in the first round. I think we're doing this year with receivers what we tend to do with quarterbacks, where we overestimate the run on these players that there's going to be. I think we've done that in the past, thinking there's going to be like 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round. That doesn't end up happening. I kind of think the same thing's happening with receiver. I think once those 4 guys are gone, I think you're going to see teams be a lot less aggressive, because I think that they feel they could wait until the second round to get a guy like Xavier Legette or Xavier Worthy or A.D. Mitchell.
The interesting one is the one that kind of fell off the table a little bit. A guy who was mocked early on as a first rounder, Keon Coleman. And I like him not so much for just the tape and his ability to catch the ball, but his size. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's standing there like 6'3", 6'4", especially when it seems like these cornerbacks are getting smaller and smaller. You really have to like your ability to match up with a guy like that. But, it's a little bit of a surprise to see that kind of name. The one name that's kind of shocking me as a first-round potential guy is Ladd McConkey. Now, mind you, I think the guy is tremendously talented, and I think he's worthy of a day 2 pick, but I feel like day 1's a little rich for what he brings. He can line up outside, but he lacks the physicality to really deal with some of these bigger corners. He's quick off the line. I mean, he'll beat you off the line, if you're not playing press, because I feel like, again, he doesn't have the physicality, but I think it's a bit rich for a guy like Ladd McConkey out of Georgia as a first rounder wide receiver. So I'd probably lean 4 to 5 if you're looking at a potential. I mean, we talked about the 4, and then we'll get into these 2 guys in just a minute, A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy. Beyond them, I don't see anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think you really get to a point where a lot of these guys, while they have traits that are very, intriguing, I think they have significant questions that would at least make me, as the fan of a team in the Jaguars that, desperately needs a receiver and could be looking to take one on Thursday night. I think all of those guys have traits that would make me pause about using a first round pick on them.
Yeah, especially if you're looking at that point in the draft, like later in the first round, and a guy like Cooper DeJean is still on the board, and you need a defensive back, or Byron Murphy, or Kool-Aid McKinstry, those guys. If I have another position or offensive line, because offensive tackle is really deep this year too, especially at the top. We could see a run on that position as well. But so if I'm looking at the wide receiver, then when we're getting towards that point where you've gone through the first 5, 6, 7 wide receivers, it doesn't make sense to use a first round pick when I could move back, pick up some more draft capital, and get that guy, early in the second round. But let's talk about those 2 wide receivers we keep mentioning that we're going to bring up. When it's A.D. Mitchell versus Xavier Worthy, if you were to say, Patrick, which one of these guys is more likely to go in the first round, I think I'm team A.D. While Worthy gives you something special team-wise, I think A.D. gives you more as a wide receiver.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think that we might be in the minority on that. I think more often than not, projections I've seen have Xavier Worthy above, both, ranked above him and slotted above him in mock drafts. But I agree with you. I think, to me, there are like kind of 2 schools of thought with it. And I think depending on the team, you could kind of justify either one being the better of the 2. And it really just depends on what you need. You look at a guy in A.D. Mitchell who's, he's big and he's fast and he can, not necessarily the best hands in the world, but can go up and get it. And maybe a little bit unpolished as a route runner, where, Xavier Worthy, a little bit smaller, but more shifty, more able to get that separation. You just question, can he go be that physical NFL receiver? And so I think it just kind of depends on what you need. But like, again, for me, like for the Jaguars, like I think A.D. Mitchell suits what they need more. So like if I were wanting to, if they were to both be there at 48, for example, when the Jaguars pick in the second round, like I would be probably leaning A.D. Mitchell for those reasons.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. If you need a prototypical number 1 guy, like your go-to guy, I think it's A.D. If you need more of like a slot guy, a kind of I'm not going to say he's a gadget player, but you line him up like a gadget. I think that's Xavier Worthy. Also, he can give you something in the return game. So, again, I say this all the time. My former scout buddy, Brian Broaddus, always says, what's your flavor of ice cream? really, when you look at
Yeah.
some of these guys and what you need. I don't think either one's a bad pick. It's just what does your team need? But if you're putting me on the spot and told me one of these guys is going in the first round, I'd probably lean AD. And according to what you're saying, we're probably wrong there. It's Xavier Worthy, but we'll kind of see how this goes. I mean, I feel like we have these arguments year in and year out, and the media says this, and people say this, and you're either both wrong or we had it wrong because the NFL front offices see a player in a completely different light than what the media is saying. Well, let's talk about the trade, right? Everybody loves the trade, whether you're trading up, trading down, the movement of the NFL draft. One of the big candidates, and we're going to talk about three of them here. The first one we're going to talk about is Minnesota, and I think we're both in agreement here. Their tendency to move in this draft is going to be up. They have an extra first round pick, so they can make a package, get into that top five, maybe look at JJ McCarthy. Or if JJ McCarthy goes in at number 3, maybe Drake May falls in their lap or Jaden Daniels falls in their lap because they decide, Washington decided to go with a different quarterback. But I think the best move for them would be to get in that top 5 and maybe give, Jim Harbaugh a call at LA and say, hey, we're going to give you these 2 picks to take your number 5 spot.
Yeah, I think of the teams we're about to talk about that are potentially looking to trade up to take a quarterback, I think this is the most likely. This is the one that there's been the most smoke about. By the way, another team that's apparently shopping their top 5 pick is Arizona. They're apparently willing to make some deals at number 4. So we'll see what happens there. I think that, obviously you look at the Vikings, they lost Kirk Cousins to free agency this offseason, who, say what you will about him, but was a more than adequate NFL starting quarterback. And they brought in Sam Darnold, the guy that NFL teams just can't seem to quit. And you could maybe talk me into that being okay, but I don't think that's a long-term solution that anyone feels great about. So I think that, when you look at a guy in Kevin O'Connell, who I think is one of the brighter offensive guys in the league right now, I think it's hard to imagine he feels great about where they're at quarterback-wise. So, yeah, I think with the extra first-round pick, with the fact that there's probably multiple teams up in that higher end of the top 10 that could be looking to make a deal, like I would almost be more surprised if the Vikings don't make a move than if they do.
Yeah, that's another one of those that seems like the worst kept secret if it was to happen, because constantly, if you see these mocks, people are projecting that Minnesota is the one that's going to jump up. Another team that could jump up would be the Denver Broncos. They're a team who, like Minnesota, have a Jets cast-off at quarterback with Zach Wilson, who just got traded in. But they need a quarterback. We talked about it earlier. The name I think is I've kind of been synonymous with them is Bo Nix at that 12 spot. But if they were to package a deal to move up into that number 5 spot, I don't know. I don't know that LA would trade with their division rival, but Denver moving up to number 5 or even number 4, like you said, if Arizona wants to back out, I think they might have to do that because I think somebody's going to move up to 5. So to get a quarterback, I think you're going to have to overpay and get that number 4 pick if Arizona is, in fact, shopping that number 4 pick.
Yeah, this Denver team is taking a quarterback. There is absolutely no doubt about the fact that they will be drafting a quarterback on Thursday or Friday, I will say. I don't know. I think taking Nix at 12 would be quite a reach. I've already made my thoughts clear on that. I think that would be a mistake. Trading up could be interesting. They're desperate. They really are. You mentioned Zach Wilson. He's Zach Wilson. At this point, maybe there's some level of play that can be unlocked there, but I don't think anyone's under any illusions about what Zach Wilson is. And then the other guy they have is Jarrett Stidham, who kind of is the incumbent starter, you could say. Didn't really play a ton last year or in his career, after they cut Russell Wilson, sort of the guy that took over. I don't think either of those guys you can feel too confident about. So, yeah, they're taking a quarterback. And Nix is the one that there seems to be the most smoke for. I just truthfully, if that's who they want, I think they could wait until the second round and still get him. I don't think there's going to be, I don't think Bo Nix is going to be in high demand this weekend. Certainly not in the top 15.
I would say Bo Nix might be in demand come pick 19 with the LA Rams if they want to think about the post Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, it's like a bridge quarterback, maybe, but
I mean, I know you have your feelings on him,
yeah,
and that's quite all right.
yeah.
That's trying to just spitball here. What
Yeah.
about the Vegas Raiders? We talked about Las Vegas earlier. I talked about them moving back. I feel like they're a team, a candidate to move up, but I think it's more likely they move back. I just don't know if they're willing to pay what it's going to cost to jump 8, 9, 10 spots to get into this quarterback race at the very top of the draft.
Yeah, I fully agree. So yeah, just to be clear, we've talked about these teams in the order they pick at 11, 12, 13. So this is the Raiders are the furthest back. And I mean, of the three teams we've talked about, I think they're the ones that you could most sell me on this quarterback room being the quarterback room come September. I mean, they've got Aiden O'Connell coming in, who honestly was okay as a rookie. I don't think he's the answer, but also probably could roll with him if you need to. You also went and got Gardner Minshew, who has proven himself to be a capable NFL quarterback, probably a guy you'd rather have be a high-end backup than a starter. But regardless, he's a guy that if you need a bridge year, he can do that for you. He did it for Indianapolis, almost got him to the playoffs and made a Pro Bowl as an alternate. So, I think that they could be okay. They could be okay, sticking with what they have. I think they'll take someone. I could see them maybe on like Saturday taking a Spencer Rattler, someone like that, a high end, but, sort of high risk also, or high upside, high risk, day 3 guy who you're not investing a ton in. I could see them making a move like that. I mean, if they wanted to get really aggressive, there has been smoke. Jaden Daniels and Antonio Pierce, sort of get along, and that might be Jaden's preferred landing spot in a perfect world. I don't think this team's going to be willing to give up what it would take to move up to 2, but hey, crazier things have happened.
And Antonio Pierce, correct me if I'm wrong, was at Arizona State with Jaden, wasn't he?
He was.
For at least
he
a
was.
year.
That's true.
Okay,
yep.
So that makes sense. All right, let's talk about your Jacksonville Jaguars. And no, we're not really an NFL podcast, but with NFL draft, it kind of changes. Jacksonville moving up for a wide receiver. Do you think that's a possibility? If there's a run at wide receiver, is there a chance that they've got to get in front of? I mean, I'm not sure who they'd have to get in front of as far as their wide receivers are concerned, but there is a chance they could miss out on the 4th best wide receiver. And they might have to, maybe if they were still going to make a pick, would have to a little bit of a stretch, but take a player who maybe was second round worthy, or do they move up and go ahead and make sure they get one of those top 4 guys?
I mean, I think it's certainly a real possibility. I mean, there's been enough smoke and rumors about it that I think it's worth keeping an eye on. I think they recognize that the receiving core needs some work right now with, being headlined by Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis. I mean, they've met with Malik Neighbors. I'm pretty sure they've also met with Rome Odunze, though I'm not positive about that one. And, they seem to have at least had interest in a trade for Brandon Ayuk. They don't seem to really be in the race for that anymore. But point being, they've put out feelers. Like, it's clear they want to add a number 1 caliber receiver. But if you're going to do that, you're not going to do it at 17, I don't think. I think you're going to have to move up. And I don't think they're willing to give up a ton to do it. But I think with the right trade partner, they might be able to get a deal done. And I would say if we get to pick 8, where the Atlanta Falcons pick, and I think that's significant for a reason I'll explain in a second. I think if we get to pick 8 and Malik Neighbors and or Rome Odunze are there, I think there's a very real chance they can move up to do it. You look at a team in the Falcons, don't need a quarterback, don't really need receiver either. So they could afford to move back. And they also just lost a mid-round pick for tampering. So they might be a team that are looking to stockpile some picks later on. So, I mean, I think it would be something that I'd start to monitor very significantly around that time if one of those guys is still there. I think given the choice, though, they'd prefer Neighbors. That seems to be the one that they're more interested in, and Neighbors just more fits what they're looking for. I think has fewer questions in the areas they really need someone to step up.
I think it's all going to depend on what happens at number 6 when it comes to the
Yeah.
draft, and which brings me to our next point. Tyler had to segue there.
Yeah, that was great.
What would be your biggest surprise of the week? And I know you're going Giants here, who have that number 6 pick. What would be your biggest surprise of the weekend?
Them taking a quarterback, which I think could very well happen. You know, not really a team that's been taught. We've seen some mocks show it, but they're not, you know, a team like the Patriots or the Commanders that, you know, has been pretty clearly projected to take a quarterback for most of this time. But there's been some smoke, and recently, especially in the last couple of days, it seems like it could be trending in that direction. Today, the main thing is it seems that they really are interested in Drake May. The problem there is it sounds like the Patriots are also very interested in Drake May. So I don't know if there's really a route for the Giants to get him. You know, if the Patriots aren't willing to budge from 3, and if they want a quarterback, I doubt they would be, unless the Giants were willing to give up quite a lot to move up 3 spots. So we'll see. It's a possibility. Again, it's happened before, you know, and they've looked at other quarterbacks too. You know, the kind of one that seemed like a month or 2 ago was JJ. They seem to really like JJ McCarthy. You know, even I saw a report from ESPN that they really like Michael Penix and would potentially consider taking him as high as 6. I don't believe that, but it's being said. So I'll, you know, repeat it here. It's a possibility. I mean, I think there's enough smoke around the Giants and quarterbacks that, you know, if they don't feel good enough about Daniel Jones, don't feel like adding a guy like Malik Neighbors would really help him go to the next level, I could see them doing it.
I think if they're going to take a quarterback like a Drake May, I think they're going to have to move to 2, because I don't think New England is going to pull off a trade knowing full well that New York is eyeing their guy. But I also don't know that Washington is going to do it, because I don't know that they want Drake May in the division.
I mean, they're in the same boats. Yeah, divisional trade, and they also need a quarterback. So
right, and then they could potentially miss out on Jaden Daniels or Drake May or JJ McCarthy, depending on how it all transpired. So yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think New York's kind of in a tough spot, so they would probably have to put their money where their mouth is and take Penix at number 6, which brings me to my surprise of the weekend. Penix going in round 1 would be my surprise. I know I've talked about a situation where it can happen. It's possible. It's not probable. I just don't see a team willing to take Penix in the first round, especially in the top half of round 1. I mean, if we get to like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. on Thursday night and Penix is drafted, I will be shocked. I don't know what I will do. I'm not going to come out here and say I'll eat a tweet or something like that. I don't know what I would do, but I'd be very, very shocked if that were the case and Penix went in the first round. Again, like I said, if it does happen, I expect it late in the first round, not early in the first round. I know there's been some talk about if he was right-handed, people would be looking at him differently, but it's not even that for me. It's his age, it's his injury history, it's his frame. I don't know how well he can sustain being healthy in the NFL to make me justify a first-round pick, unless I just really want that 5th year of control. I don't know. What do you think, Tyler?
No, totally. 100%. I would be stunned if someone takes Michael Penix in the first round. And it's nothing against him personally. There's just way too many red flags here. Again, age. I mean, that is, I think, a real one. I really do. I think it's a significant question if a guy, you know, is in his 6th year of college football. I think there's a reason for that generally. And it's hard. Like, how do you compare a guy like that to a guy like Caleb Williams, who's 3 years younger and like playing at a higher level still? Like, to me, that's significant. I think that says a lot. Not to mention the fact that he has torn his ACL 3 times, I believe, 3 times in his college career. And to be honest, like, has mechanical concerns. I mean, the lefty thing, whatever, I think it's overblown, but I think there's a real stigma to it, whether it's fair or not. I think that is something that teams would hold against him. And it does change things operationally with how you do like play actions and rollouts and stuff like that. It's not a big deal, but it is different. But I mean, to me, like as good of a deep ball as Michael Penix throws, I don't think his short and middle accuracy is nearly as good. And again, he had very talented receivers, including a guy in Romo Dunze who is a 50-50 ball artist. Like, really bails you out. You don't have to put the ball, pinpoint on the numbers when you have a guy like that. I think a lot of issues that Penix has would get exposed in the NFL. And I'm not saying don't take him on Friday as a flyer, but if you're investing a first round pick in this guy, let alone like trading up for him, I think that's going to be a mistake.
Yeah, it's not just his age, because Bo Nix is actually older.
Yeah.
Bo Nix is 24. And I've been a guy that says I wouldn't be surprised if Bo Nix taking the first round. It's the age, it's the interceptions, it's when you worry about protecting the football and all those things. I think it's just a culmination, like you said, just too many red flags. It's not one red flag is worse than the other. It's just a culmination of it. And that's why I would be deeply surprised if it happens. But we'll find out on Thursday night if indeed it happens. And we'll be back next week as we wrap up the NFL draft. And then we get you ready. We start getting you ready. We're really going to be deep diving into some of these conferences, new look conferences, team by team reviews, previews. There's going to be a lot to talk about as we get into the summer months, as we'll get you ready for the 2024 college football season, where we will finally see the 12-team playoff that we've been wanting for years. But that'll do it for this week. Tyler, I'm Patrick. See you next week.